Mission Beach today didn't just do the wave, they were the wave.
Joining a global demonstration to connect the dots
between the extreme weather events and climate change.
My name is Heather Vokush. Welcome. Now, the science is clear. Global warming is happening faster than ever, and humans are responsible. I mean, we can see this in some of the crazy weather that has gone on, just for one. Now, what are the dangers of global warming, and how can each of us help prevent it or at least slow it down? Now, we are joined today by Phil Arignanu, who is the U.S. campaign director and co-founder of 350.org. So thank you so much for having joined us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what is global warming? How can you put this in easy terms?
The basic science of global warming is that there's a piece of our atmosphere that sort of acts like a blanket. So when the sun sort of shines down and hits the Earth, some of that heat is absorbed, and more of it is absorbed at the equators. That's why the equator is hotter, and less of it is absorbed at the poles, and that's why the poles are colder. But that blanket is made up of gas, a number of different gases, but the principal one that keeps sort of that heat in and doesn't let all of it out into space is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide exists naturally and gets emitted from the soil, from us breathing, from the oceans and so forth, but also it's emitted by humans as we take coal, oil, and gas from underground and burn it and put it in the atmosphere. So basically what global warming is a thickening of that blanket so that the entire planet heats up.
And what is this 350 in your name?
Previous to the Industrial Revolution, around 1880, when not that many people were burning coal or oil or gas for electricity or heat or really anything, the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere was about 280 parts per million. Over the course of the last couple centuries, we've increased that to about 390 parts per million. Okay. Seems really small, 390 out of a million parts. But it actually makes a huge difference because each molecule of carbon reflects heat back onto the planet significantly.
People around the world are using today as a day of action in fighting climate change.
L'action mondiale contre le réchauffement climatique.
Dia de ação mundial para alertar contra as alterações climáticas.
Scientists have recently told us, including NASA's Dr. James Hansen, who works here at the Columbia University, that 350 parts per million is the top safe level, above which is dangerous. So it's sort of like if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, you got to stop eating cheese and bacon because your cholesterol's too high. The doctor doesn't know when you're going to have a heart attack, but it's a probability that you are going to have a heart attack.
So if 350 is optimal and we're at 390, does that mean it's over? I mean,
it doesn't mean it's over, but it does mean we're in the danger zone.
Okay.
That heart attack could happen at any time, and we're seeing sort of maybe the palpitations, the way that the planet has reacted this summer, the huge fires that we're seeing, the droughts that we're seeing out west.
Things happen. They always have. A storm, a heat wave, a downpour. But now they happen differently, more frequent and more intense. We're changing the planet's climate, and all over the world, people are paying the price. But because it's a big world, we don't make the connections we should. When Thailand has the worst flooding in its history, only a month after Central America has the worst flooding in its history, a month after Vermont has the worst flooding in its history, in the same year that the Mississippi River has the worst flooding in its history, and Queensland in Australia, a few months after Pakistan floods so badly 20 million people are forced from their homes. It's connected. Connected to the fact that warm air holds more water vapor than cold air, loading the dice for deluge, and loading the dice for drought too, since more water evaporates into the atmosphere. So it's really no surprise we've seen the worst drought in the American Southwest, and the hottest fires in Australia, and the crop-withering heat in Russia, and the staggeringly dry famine across the Horn of Africa. We're going to connect the dots on climate change and extreme weather, literally. On May 5th, we will rally at hundreds of sites around the planet afflicted by climate change. We'll show the world how the pieces of this puzzle fit together. You'll forgive us if we're just the littlest bit angry. It's not fair what's happening. The fossil fuel industry, in pursuit of ever more profit, is making life impossible for many of us. We should be mad. We're hopeful too, though. Hopeful that if people begin to make the connections, they'll draw the obvious conclusion. The time has come to move away from coal, gas, and oil. And we'll only do that if we start to connect the dots. Join us on May 5th, climatedots.org.
A lot of the extreme weather events here in this country are suggesting that we're approaching that level at which we may have a heart attack as a planet. Then it's really game over. But if we stop emitting carbon now, very soon, in our, stop emitting carbon by burning coal for electricity, stop emitting carbon by reducing the amount that we're spewing when we're driving our cars and using transportation, then we can bring that back down, and the Earth will sort of cleanse it out of the atmosphere through natural processes.
And clearly it's not only in this country. I mean, the strange weather has been international. Now, the interesting thing is that the leadership on this topic has not actually been coming from this country so much. We have this election coming up. And what are your ideas regarding the candidates' responsibility towards this topic?
Well, it's really interesting, Heather. Neither of the candidates, neither President Obama nor Governor Romney, had really talked about climate change at all before a couple weeks ago. Yeah. And then Governor Romney made a joke during his speech at the Republican National Convention where he said, "My opponent wants to stop the sea levels from rising." And it was a huge laugh line at the Republican National Convention. Showed how completely out of touch the entire party is with the science. And frankly was an embarrassment, I think, to a lot of folks on both sides of the equation, both Republicans and Democrats who believe in science. 98% of climate scientists believe that climate change is happening, so it seems natural that they wouldn't say that. But that also opened up a window for President Obama to start talking about climate change, which previous to this election for the last couple years, the conventional wisdom in Washington was that you don't touch climate change because it's political kryptonite.
Yeah, well, I believe that when he was running before, he did talk about it, and he did, raise the fuel efficiency standards, but not much else, at least, so far. So what would you like to see done on a political level in this country?
I think, whoever wins the presidency has an opportunity to really make America a clean energy leader. President Obama has taken some really big steps, but compared to the size of the problem, some really small steps. Partly because Congress hasn't really let him make very much progress. But there are many ways that I think the president's sort of plans differ from Governor Romney's plans. One key element is this fact that President Obama has delayed the building of this Keystone XL pipeline that would pipe lots of oil from Canada, Canada's tar sands, across the U.S. and for export to China and India. Governor Romney said that he would approve that on day one.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of specific projects. Beyond the specific projects, there are any number of ways that a president, next term's president, could take on climate change, from implementing a fee and dividend system where we tax the polluters and send checks home to every American, to just capping greenhouse gases and putting a stout price on carbon.
I wrote the first book about climate change way back in 1989 when I was a young man in my 20s. Now I'm in my 50s, so I've spent my life watching our political system try to cope with the biggest challenge humans have ever faced. So far, they've failed. I used to think that was about some failure of human psychology or our love of the status quo or something like that, but I've changed my mind. I think most people, faced with the spreading plague of drought and flood and failed harvest, are ready to take action. The problem is the fossil fuel industry. It's the most profitable enterprise in the history of the Earth. Exxon makes more money each year than any company in the history of money. And much of that profit is based on a simple fact. Alone among industries, it doesn't have to clean up after itself. We let coal and gas and oil barons use the atmosphere as an open sewer into which to dump carbon, their main waste product, for free. That's a sweetheart deal. Imagine you owned a restaurant, and the city let you shovel your waste into the center of the street each night instead of paying for it to be carted away. You'd make more profit too. But soon the streets would be overrun with toxins and trash. Well, that's what's going on in our atmosphere right now. Every sensible economist has said that we should force the fossil fuel industry to pay for the damage carbon creates. But it hasn't happened because this industry of polluters is able to pervert our democracy with endless campaign contributions and lobbying money. I mean, our politicians should be forced to wear decals on their suits like NASCAR drivers. And here's the thing, we're not the radicals. We want a world a little bit like the one we were born into. Oil companies are the radical ones. They're willing to alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere in order to make more money. They've already run the carbon level in the atmosphere well past the safe line, 350 parts per million. Now they're trying for a world that, it'll jeopardize the future of most living things. Does that seem right to you? So, this is our challenge for the years ahead. If we can break their power, then the planet has a future. I don't know that we can. They are the ones with all the money. So we need to find other currencies, like passion, spirit, creativity. Sometimes we're going to have to put our bodies on the line and get arrested. It's the fight of our time, maybe the fight of all time. And we should all be honored to be a small part of it. Help ensure that our planet is protected for all future generations. Go to 350.org and join the fight today.
The president and the co-founder of 350.org, Bill McKibben, wrote a very seminal article recently in Rolling Stone. Can you talk about that?
That's right. He wrote an article in Rolling Stone that really outlined the new math of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have this number 350. That's a really important number. Mm-hmm. It's the carbon in the atmosphere. But we also recognize that in the with the lack of political will in this country, we really need to go to the fossil fuel companies that actually have the reserves of coal and oil and gas underground.
Okay. And just to let you know, it's called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. And so can I throw some of these numbers out at you?
Please.
There's 3 numbers. So the first number is 2 degrees Celsius. What is that?
That's right. So 2 degrees Celsius is almost like 350 parts per million is the safe level of carbon in the atmosphere. 2 degrees is the absolute maximum level at which human life can really continue at any significant level. The way that this planet looks now is a planet that it wouldn't look the same past 2 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
We've already gone up 1 degree Celsius, and we're seeing these kinds of extreme weather disasters. And so 2 degrees is that sort of limit.
Okay, okay. And I would encourage you to actually read the article to see what the second and the third numbers are. But the article asks, who is the real enemy? And so what would you say? Who is the real enemy in this?
Well, if you go to a store and to return something that didn't work, or a piece of fruit that was ruined or something, you would go to the cashier, and if the cashier didn't have the answer for you or couldn't do anything or didn't have the power to do that, you'd ask for the manager. And so the idea of going right to the fossil fuel companies instead of going to our politicians is sort of the same idea.
So you're saying the fossil fuel companies are the real enemy?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
The fossil fuel companies have shown really no interest in shifting to a low-carbon economy. They made some sort of token moves here and there, but as of late have really not shown any leadership, and in fact have spent millions and millions of dollars lobbying the U.S. government and foreign governments to stop them from doing anything to regulate carbon emissions.
That, I think, is the problem, because you've got this collusion then between the companies and the government, and so, it's a very cozy relationship, but the, climate does not benefit. And so, in that case, what kind of pressure can be brought to these companies?
That's a really good question, and that's one of the things that we're always struggling with is what are the best ways to really get over those challenges and be able to fight those fights that actually make a difference. Some of those ways are by stopping pipelines like the Keystone XL pipeline, which was a $7 billion pipeline project, which is now on hold because of the work that we've done with our allies in Canada and across the country. Another way to do that is to really hit these fossil fuel companies in their share prices. And so what we're doing this year is we're going to be touring around the country talking about this article and inviting students and other folks who are invested in pension funds or church funds or synagogue funds to divest their funds from fossil fuel companies.
And when will you be doing this?
We'll be doing this this fall. We're going to kick off the Do the Math tour with a presentation about these numbers and with Bill McKibben and many of our other friends. We'll be taken to the road on a biodiesel-powered tour bus around the country. The day after the election, we'll be in Seattle, and we'll be crossing the country, and we'll be in New York on November 16th up at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and we're hoping that folks will join us there. They can find out about it at 350.org.
And what are you hoping to accomplish with this tour?
Well, we're hoping that people will wake up and understand this terrifying new math of climate change that really explains who's really blocking progress on climate change, these fossil fuel companies. And incidentally, the top 200 fossil fuel companies, oil, gas, and coal companies, own the vast majority of the reserves underground. So there really are specific companies, many of which you probably know the names of because you fuel up your car with the fuel that comes from these companies. But we're going to be trying to get universities and pension funds to divest. And, it's sort of not a spectator sport because this is the future for everybody. It's not limited to folks in Bangladesh or in the Pacific Islands anymore whose villages are going underwater. It really is now us. And we've seen, the kinds of weather disasters that have hit Americans close to home. And so we're hoping that the tour will touch on that. And also that we'll be able to identify who the enemies are, really, and what a strategy is to actually impact that, get them to stop blocking progress.
So if an action tip for a large group is to divest, what would you say it is for an individual?
folks like myself would be encouraging people to stop driving and to be screwing in new light bulbs. But or even to be pressuring our politicians. But I think after the last few years where money in politics has just become so rampant and it's really tough to influence politicians, even though they're theoretically supposed to be representing us and not the corporations that fund them, that the reality is that there are real systemic problems with the way that our markets work. And no matter how many light bulbs you screw in, no matter how much less you drive your car, both of which are really critical and a good place to start, that's not enough. It's not going to change the way that our system works and the choices that we don't even have the ability to make, like where our electricity comes from or how our food gets to us. So getting after these fossil fuel companies directly via their share prices and via the investments that we have institutionally, which are much larger than the kind of investments you or I might have in our mutual funds or pension funds, is a real way to have economic impact and to put people power into practice.
Okay. And I like your website too because it has a lot of, take action points and a lot of information. And so I would highly encourage anybody who's watching today to go to 350.org and just play. There's so much to do there. There's a lot of information about events, and you can see protests that have taken place across the world. It's really quite inspiring. And so on that note of positive action, we thank you very much for having joined us today. And we encourage you to visit 350.org and get involved. Thank you very much.
Le changement climatique est déjà une réalité dévastatrice.
But we must do this all together, and we must do it now.
Die Stunde vor der Dämmerung ist die dunkelste.
They marched in Berlin and the World Fair. They marched in Cape Town and Apartheid Fair. They marched in Copenhagen, and we are going to get a real deal.
Notre message est clair.
O mundo quer um acordo para valer.
Die Welt will ein echtes Abkommen.
Across the globe gathered today to rally for solutions to climate change.
Tarjeta, tomar la bicicleta, moverse hasta la otra parada.
The rally was part of a worldwide event at locations around the globe.
Mission Beach today didn't just do the wave, they were the wave.
Joining a global demonstration to connect the dots
between the extreme weather events and climate change.
The U.S. campaign director and co-founder of 350.org. So thank you so much for having joined us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what is global warming? How can you put this in easy terms?
The basic science of global warming is that there's a piece of our atmosphere that sort of acts like a blanket. So when the sun sort of shines down and hits the Earth, some of that heat is absorbed, and more of it is absorbed at the equators. That's why the equator is hotter, and less of it is absorbed at the poles, and that's why the poles are colder. But that blanket is made up of gas, a number of different gases, but the principal one that keeps sort of that heat in and doesn't let all of it out into.
My name is Heather Vaucouche. Welcome. Now, the science is clear. Global warming is happening faster than ever, and humans are responsible. I mean, we can see this in some of the crazy weather that has gone on, just for one. Now, what are the dangers of global warming, and how can each of us help prevent it or at least slow it down? Now, we are joined today by Phil Arignanu, who is